The massive alien ships appeared at the edge of the solar system like dark clouds blocking out the stars. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the sensor readings with growing concern. 47 ships had dropped out of faster-than-light travel and now hung in space like sleeping giants. Each one was 3 times larger than humanity's biggest warship. Jake had been expecting this day for years. The deep space monitoring stations had detected signs of alien activity moving toward Earth for the past 6 months. Now they were here, and humanity was about to meet its first contact with alien life. The moment should have been historic and wonderful, but the size of the alien fleet made it clear this was not a friendly visit. Captain Lisa Walker hurried onto the bridge carrying a datapad filled with communication protocols. She had spent her entire career preparing for first contact scenarios, but nothing had prepared her for this. The aliens had not responded to any of humanity's greeting messages. They simply sat there in space like predators watching their prey. Commander Alex Stone looked up from his intelligence station with worry in his eyes. He had been trying to scan the alien ships, but their technology was far beyond human understanding. The energy readings from their weapons systems alone showed they could destroy Earth's entire defense fleet without breaking a sweat. This was not going to be a fair fight. The silence stretched for 3 hours before the aliens finally sent a message. It came through on all human communication channels at once in perfect English. The voice was cold and mechanical like a computer speaking. Primitive species of the third planet, you will surrender immediately. Your world now belongs to the Caltharian Empire. Resistance is pointless. You have 1 planetary rotation to comply. Jake felt his jaw tighten as he listened to the message. These aliens had traveled across the galaxy to demand humanity's surrender without even trying to talk first. They spoke like Earth was already theirs, and humans were just pests to be removed. The arrogance in their tone made his blood boil. Lisa stepped forward and activated the communication system. She took a deep breath and spoke in her most diplomatic voice. This is Captain Lisa Walker representing the United Earth government. We welcome you to our solar system and hope we can establish peaceful relations between our peoples. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss your intentions. The alien response came back within minutes. There is nothing to discuss. Your species will surrender or face destruction. We are the Caltharian Empire. We have conquered 43 worlds. Your primitive technology cannot stand against us. Comply or be eliminated. Jake watched the tactical display as more alien ships continued to arrive. The count was now up to 62 vessels and still growing. Each new ship that appeared made humanity's chances of survival look smaller, but something inside him refused to accept defeat before the fight had even begun. Fleet Commander Zexai of the Caltharian Empire stood in his command center and observed the human response with mild interest. In his 300 years of military service, he had overseen the conquest of dozens of worlds. The pattern was always the same. His fleet would arrive, demand surrender, and the local species would quickly comply after seeing their technological superiority. The humans were taking longer than usual to respond, but this was not uncommon. Some species needed time to accept their fate. The primitive creatures of this world would see reason soon enough. They always did. No species in the galaxy was foolish enough to fight the Caltharian Empire once they understood the hopelessness of their situation back on Earth. President Mary Johnson called an emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council. Representatives from every nation gathered in the secure bunker beneath Geneva. The mood was grim as everyone understood what they were facing. Humanity's first contact with alien life had turned into a demand for total surrender. General Chris Taylor stood before the assembled leaders with a detailed military assessment. Earth's space fleet consisted of 37 ships designed for exploration and asteroid mining. The aliens had brought what appeared to be a full invasion force with weapons that could glass entire continents. By every reasonable military calculation, resistance would be suicide. Dr. Helen Ross raised her hand from the back of the room. As humanity's leading expert on human psychology and evolution, she had been studying the alien message and their behavior patterns. Something about this situation felt wrong to her scientific mind. Why would an advanced alien species need to demand surrender from a primitive world? Why not simply take what they wanted? Jake Morrison received new orders from Earth Command within hours. He was to take a small diplomatic team to meet with the aliens at the neutral space station Olympus. The hope was that face-to-face negotiations might find a peaceful solution, but Jake could see in the eyes of his crew that nobody really believed peace was possible. As the UES Defiance moved toward the meeting point, Jake thought about his daughter back on Earth and the billions of humans who were counting on him. The aliens had asked for surrender and expected humanity to bow down like all the other species they had conquered. But something deep in Jake's human nature rebelled against that idea. Humans had never been good at surrendering, and he was not about to start now. The meeting aboard Space Station Olympus lasted exactly 47 minutes before Captain Lisa Walker realized that diplomacy was dead. Fleet Commander Zexai sat across from her in the neutral conference room like a statue made of gray skin, and Cold Eyes, his translator device, spoke in that same mechanical voice that had delivered the surrender demand. Lisa tried every negotiation technique she knew, but the alien commander showed no interest in compromise. The Caltharians wanted complete surrender. 90% of humanity would be relocated to labor colonies on distant worlds. Earth would become a military outpost for the Empire. The remaining humans would serve as workers and nothing more. Lisa asked about human rights and freedoms. Zexai seemed genuinely confused by the concepts. In the Caltharian Empire, conquered species had no rights except the right to serve their betters. The idea that an inferior species might demand equal treatment was apparently so foreign to him that his translator struggled to find words. The meeting ended when Lisa stood up and delivered humanity's official response. "We reject your terms completely. Earth is our home and we will defend it. If you want our world, you will have to take it by force." Zexai stared at her for a long moment before dismissing her as clearly insane. Back on Earth, President Mary Johnson faced the hardest decision in human history. The Global Defense Council had spent hours debating their options, but the reality was simple. They could surrender and accept slavery or fight and face almost certain extinction. By every logical measure, surrender was the smart choice. Dr. Helen Ross stood before the council with her research findings spread across the main display screen. She had spent weeks studying every piece of information about the Caltharians and had made a discovery that changed everything. Humans were different from every other species the Empire had encountered. The brain scans showed it clearly. When faced with extreme danger, human neural chemistry underwent a massive change. Stress hormones flooded the system while the parts of the brain responsible for creative thinking became hyperactive. Other species showed the opposite reaction. They became calm and accepting when faced with superior force. Helen explained that this difference went back millions of years to when humans were pack hunters on the African plains. When a human tribe was threatened, they did not run or hide. They gathered together and fought as one. This response was so deeply programmed into human DNA that it activated automatically whenever the species was threatened. General Chris Taylor listened to the science but focused on the military reality. The human fleet was outnumbered and outgunned by a ratio of nearly 3-1. Their weapons were primitive compared to Caltharian technology. In a straight fight, humanity would lose badly and quickly, but Captain Sam Rodriguez had different ideas. As commander of Earth's reconnaissance forces, he had been studying the alien fleet positions for days. The Caltharians had arranged their ships in a standard occupation formation. They were prepared for surrender ceremonies and peaceful takeover operations. They were not prepared for guerrilla warfare. Sam pointed out that the aliens seemed to have no experience with prolonged resistance. Every species they had conquered had surrendered quickly after seeing the hopelessness of their situation. The Caltharians had never had to fight a war of attrition against a determined enemy. Commander Alex Stone added his intelligence analysis to the discussion. The intercepted Caltharian communications showed confusion and frustration among their officers. They kept asking their high command for guidance on dealing with continued human resistance. Apparently, this situation was outside their normal procedures. President Johnson called for a vote. Every representative knew they were choosing between probable death and certain slavery. The vote was not even close. Humanity would fight. They would defend their home regardless of the cost. When the final tally was announced, even the most pessimistic generals felt a surge of pride in their species. Admiral Jake Morrison received the orders while his ship was returning from the failed diplomatic mission. Earth command was clear and direct: humanity would not surrender. The fleet was authorized to begin military operations against the Caltharian invasion force immediately. There would be no second chances and no retreat. Jake gathered his senior officers in the briefing room and delivered the news. Some of them looked scared, but none of them looked surprised. They had all known in their hearts that humans would never accept slavery willingly. The question now was how to hurt an enemy that was stronger than them in every measurable way. The answer came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Karen White had been studying the psychological profiles that Dr. Ross had provided about Caltharian behavior. The aliens operated on a strict hierarchy where defeat meant death or disgrace. They had never learned to adapt their tactics because they had never needed to. Karen suggested that humans should fight like humans had always fought. Not as a formal military force, but as angry civilians defending their homes. Every human should become a soldier, every ship should become a weapon, every colony should become a fortress. The Caltharians wanted a quick surrender, but humans would give them a long bloody war. The plan that emerged from the strategic sessions was unlike anything in military history. Earth's space fleet would scatter and attack the aliens using hidden tactics. The colonies would be turned into armed camps. Every human settlement would resist to the last person. The goal was not to win quickly, but to make the cost of conquest so high that the Caltharians would eventually give up. Dr. Helen Ross made one final presentation to the leadership before the fighting began. Her research had shown that human aggression under stress was not just random violence, it was a calculated response that made humans more creative and more willing to take risks. Other species became predictable when threatened, but humans became dangerous. President Johnson made the final broadcast to Earth and all human colonies. Her message was simple and direct. The aliens had come demanding surrender and expecting humanity to bow down like all the other species they had conquered. But humans were not like other species. When pushed to the edge, humans did not break, they fought back. The message ended with words that would be remembered forever. They asked for our surrender, we give them war. They demanded our submission, we give them defiance. They wanted us to kneel. Instead, we stand and fight. This is our home and we will defend it until our last breath. Within hours, recruitment centers across Earth were overwhelmed with volunteers. The Caltharians had expected fear and acceptance. Instead, they had awakened something primal and dangerous in the human species. The war was about to begin, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what happened when you threatened their home. Fleet Commander Zexai stared at the tactical display with growing irritation. 3 weeks had passed since the humans rejected his surrender demand, and they still showed no signs of accepting reality. Every other species in the galaxy had understood their situation by now. The humans seemed to suffer from some form of collective mental illness. The decision to destroy New Geneva was not made in anger but as a calculated demonstration. The moon colony housed 50,000 human civilians, including families and children. A single pulse from a Caltharian destroyer turned the entire settlement into glowing plasma. Surely now the humans would understand the futility of resistance. Colonel Danny Martinez was reviewing supply reports when the news reached Earth Command. New Geneva was gone. 50,000 people had been murdered in an instant, including his wife and 2 young sons. The official report stated that no survivors had been found. The colony had been completely vaporized. Danny stood in the briefing room staring at the empty space where New Geneva used to be and felt something break inside his chest. The pain was so intense that he could barely breathe. But underneath the grief was something else growing, a cold rage that seemed to fill every cell in his body. The aliens had just made a terrible mistake. The Caltharian High Command expected the destruction of New Geneva to end human resistance immediately. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Recruitment centers that had been busy before were now surrounded by crowds of angry volunteers. Factories that had been producing civilian goods switched to making weapons. The entire human species seemed to have gone insane with fury. Lieutenant Karen White volunteered for the first retaliatory strike within hours of the colony's destruction. Her plan was simple and direct. Take a small ship loaded with explosives and ram it into the Caltharian supply depot orbiting Jupiter. The mission was suicide, but Karen did not care. The aliens needed to learn that murdering human civilians came with a price. The attack surprised the Caltharians completely. Their sensors detected the incoming human ship, but they assumed it was another diplomatic vessel. No species in their experience had ever used suicide tactics. When Karen's ship exploded against their supply depot, it took out 3 months' worth of fuel and ammunition for the entire invasion fleet. Dr. Paul Bennett had been studying captured Caltharian equipment when he made a discovery that changed everything. The aliens were not just physically different from humans, their brains worked in completely different ways. Caltharian psychology was built around rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience. The concept of continued resistance after clear defeat was literally impossible for them to understand. Paul explained his findings to the military leadership with growing excitement. The Caltharians ruled their empire through fear and the appearance of invincibility. Every conquest had followed the same pattern: show superior force, demand surrender, and accept submission. They had never encountered a species that kept fighting, after being clearly beaten. This psychological blind spot was humanity's first real advantage. The aliens expected rational behavior from their enemies. They planned their tactics around the assumption that inferior species would eventually see reason and surrender. But humans were not rational when their homes were threatened. They were emotional and unpredictable and willing to die for abstract concepts like freedom. General Chris Taylor immediately began planning operations that would exploit this weakness. Instead of fighting the kind of war the Caltharians expected, humanity would fight like cornered animals. Every battle would be a desperate struggle. Every defeat would lead to more resistance instead of less. The aliens would never be able to predict human responses because humans themselves did not know what they would do next. The invasion of Earth's outer colonies began exactly as Zexai had planned. His forces moved methodically from settlement to settlement, expecting token resistance followed by quick surrender. Instead, they found prepared fortifications and determined defenders who fought to the death rather than accept capture. Mining Station Alpha 7 became the first symbol of human defiance. The 300 workers and their families could have evacuated when the Caltharian ships arrived. Instead, they stayed and turned their industrial equipment into weapons. When the aliens finally took the station after 6 days of fighting, they found only bodies. Not a single human had surrendered. Captain Tony Garcia commanded the defense of Agricultural Dome 12 on the edge of the outer system. His garrison consisted of 60 colonial marines and 300 civilian volunteers. The Caltharians attacked with overwhelming force, expecting easy victory. Instead, they found themselves trapped in brutal close-quarters combat that lasted for weeks. The aliens had superior technology, but the humans had superior motivation. Every corridor in the dome became a battlefield. Every room was fought for, inch by inch. When the Caltharians finally broke through the last defensive position, Tony activated the dome's self-destruct system rather than let the aliens claim victory. Commander Rachel Moore monitored communications across the solar system and began to notice something remarkable happening. Other alien species were watching the human-Caltharian war with growing interest. For the first time in centuries, someone was successfully resisting the Empire. Underground resistance movements on conquered worlds were sending secret messages, asking for advice and support. The news that other species were inspired by human resistance spread quickly through Earth's leadership. President Johnson authorized covert operations to make contact with these resistance groups. If humanity was going to fight the Caltharian Empire, they would not fight alone. Every oppressed species in the galaxy was a potential ally. Dr. Helen Ross studied the psychological reports from the front lines and made another crucial discovery. The stress of prolonged combat was actually making human soldiers more effective rather than less. Their brains were adapting to the constant danger by becoming more creative and more aggressive. They were evolving in real time to become better warriors. The Caltharian response to human resistance grew increasingly desperate. Zexai requested additional forces from the High Command but was told that no reinforcements were available. The Empire was already stretched thin, controlling their existing territories. This single primitive planet was supposed to be an easy conquest, not a major military operation. Major Steve Collins prepared for the defense of Mars with grim determination. The Red Planet had been terraformed for over a century and housed nearly 10 million human colonists. If Mars fell, the path to Earth would be wide open, but Steve had no intention of letting that happen. He would turn Mars into a fortress that would break the Caltharian advance. The battle for Mars began when Caltharian ships entered orbit around the planet. Steve had spent months preparing defenses using captured alien technology and human ingenuity. Every major city was protected by energy shields. Hidden weapons platforms waited in the asteroid belt. Underground bunkers housed millions of armed civilians, ready to fight guerrilla wars. Zexai personally led the assault on Mars, expecting to crush human resistance with overwhelming force. Instead, he found himself trapped in the kind of prolonged siege warfare that Caltharian doctrine had no answer for. Every day of fighting cost him ships and soldiers that he could not replace. The humans seemed willing to sacrifice everything to hold their ground. The siege of Mars became a symbol broadcast across the galaxy. Here was proof that the mighty Caltharian Empire could be stopped. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, but they refused to break. Other species, watching from conquered worlds, began to whisper that perhaps the Empire was not invincible after all. But Fleet Commander Zexai received increasingly angry messages from the High Command demanding quick victory. The prolonged human resistance was causing problems throughout the Empire. Conquered species were asking questions about Caltherian superiority. Some were even beginning to organize their own resistance movements. The human war was spreading like a disease across the galaxy. 6 months into the war, Captain Tony Garcia led the most daring operation in human military history. Intelligence reports had located a Caltherian command vessel operating alone near the outer asteroid belt. The ship contained advanced technology and strategic information that could change the course of the war. Tony volunteered to capture it intact. The mission required precise timing and incredible luck. Tony's strike team approached the alien vessel using a captured Caltherian shuttle. To avoid detection, the plan was to board the ship during a shift change when security would be minimal. If they failed, they would be captured or killed. If they succeeded, humanity would gain access to technology that could level the playing field. The boarding operation went perfectly for exactly 12 minutes. Tony's team eliminated the skeleton crew and secured the command center before alarms could be raised. But then they discovered something unexpected. The ship's computer systems contained detailed records of Caltherian military operations across the entire galaxy. They had stumbled onto intelligence goldmine. Dr. Helen Ross worked frantically to decode the captured data while Tony's team held the ship against Caltherian rescue attempts. The information revealed the true scope of the Empire's weakness. They were not the unstoppable force they pretended to be. Their military was spread thin across dozens of conquered worlds. Many of their subject species were on the edge of revolt. The captured technology allowed human engineers to reverse engineer Caltherian weapons and adapt them for human use. But more importantly, the strategic intelligence showed that other species throughout the galaxy were already fighting their own resistance wars. The humans were not alone in their struggle against the Empire. Commander Rachel Moore established secret communication links with 17 different resistance movements. On conquered worlds, each group had been fighting isolated guerrilla campaigns against Caltherian occupation forces, but now they could coordinate their efforts and share tactics that had proven effective against the aliens. The Zilani of the Proxima system had been sabotaging Caltherian mining operations for decades. The Koroth had turned their homeworld into an urban battlefield where every building was a fortress. The Vegan had developed biological weapons specifically designed to target Caltherian physiology. Each species brought unique strengths to the growing alliance. Major Steve Collins transformed Mars into an impregnable fortress that the Caltherians could not break despite months of continuous assault. The Red Planet's defenses combined human determination with captured alien technology to create something neither species could have achieved alone. Underground factories produced weapons while hidden bunkers sheltered millions of civilians. The siege of Mars became a propaganda victory that resonated across the galaxy. Here was visual proof that a supposedly primitive species could stand against the mighty Caltherian Empire and win. Other conquered worlds began openly discussing the possibility of successful resistance. The idea of rebellion spread like wildfire. Through the galactic communication networks, fleet commanders XI faced increasing pressure from the High Command to end the human war quickly. What was supposed to be a routine conquest had become a costly military disaster that was encouraging rebellion throughout the Empire. He had lost nearly half his invasion fleet and gained control of exactly 0 human worlds. The Caltherian Empire operated on the principle of fear-based control. Conquered species obeyed because they believed resistance was impossible. But the humans had proven that resistance was not only possible but effective. Every day the war continued was another day that other species had to consider their own options. Captain Amy Foster volunteered to lead the first joint human-alien strike team against a Caltherian supply depot in the Centauri system. Her team included humans, Zilani fighters, and Koroth saboteurs working together for the first time. The operation was a complete success and demonstrated that different species could cooperate effectively against their common enemy. The psychological impact of successful joint operations was enormous. For centuries, the Caltherian Empire had maintained control by keeping conquered species isolated from each other. Now those species were not only communicating but actively cooperating in military operations. The Empire's worst nightmare was becoming reality. Admiral Jake Morrison coordinated the largest human fleet operation of the war using a combination of captured alien ships and retrofitted human vessels. Operation Wildfire targeted 3 major Caltherian strongholds simultaneously, stretching the alien defenses beyond their breaking point. The attack succeeded because the aliens still had not adapted to humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything. For victory, the success of Operation Wildfire sent shockwaves through the Caltharian military hierarchy. Their tactical doctrine was based on overwhelming local superiority and quick decisive battles. They had no experience dealing with an enemy that could coordinate complex multi-front operations. While accepting massive casualties to achieve strategic objectives, Commander Ben Parker made a crucial discovery while analyzing Caltharian communication patterns. The Empire's control system was more fragile than anyone had realized. Each conquest depended on maintaining the image of invincibility. Through quick, decisive victories, prolonged resistance campaigns damaged that image and encouraged other conquered species to consider revolt. The rebellion began on the industrial world of Kepler 44 to be where the Alani had been forced to manufacture weapons for the Caltharian military. Inspired by human resistance tactics, the Jelani workers began sabotaging production lines and hiding weapons for their own use. When Caltharian overseers tried to restore order, they found themselves facing an entire planet in revolt. Dr. Paul Bennett worked with alien scientists to develop new weapons, specifically designed to exploit Caltharian psychological weaknesses. The research revealed that the aliens had an almost pathological need for order and predictability. Chaotic guerrilla tactics caused them severe psychological stress that impaired their decision-making abilities. The war began to change character as more species joined the Resistance Alliance. What had started as a human defense of Earth became a galaxy-wide rebellion against Caltharian rule. The Empire found itself fighting simultaneous wars on dozens of worlds with inadequate forces and declining morale. Lieutenant Laura Thompson led a desperate assault on the Caltharian Sector Command base hidden in the asteroid field near Wolf 359. Her mission was to capture or destroy the communication hub that coordinated Empire operations throughout the entire sector. The base was heavily defended, but Laura's team had one advantage the aliens did not expect. They were willing to die to complete their mission. The attack on the Sector Command base succeeded beyond all expectations. Laura's team not only destroyed the communication equipment but captured vital intelligence about Caltharian military deployments throughout the galaxy. More importantly, they cut off communication between the invasion fleets and the Empire's high command, leaving local commanders isolated and confused. The isolation of Caltharian forces had immediate effects across the war zone. Without constant guidance from their superiors, local commanders began making increasingly desperate decisions. Some retreated to defensive positions, others launched suicidal attacks against heavily defended human positions. The rigid Caltharian command structure was collapsing under the stress of prolonged warfare. President Mary Johnson addressed the combined resistance leadership in a secret conference broadcast to 17 different star systems. Her message was simple but powerful. The Caltharian Empire ruled through fear and the illusion of invincibility. Every successful resistance operation damaged that illusion. Every day they continued fighting was another day closer to freedom for all oppressed species. The conference ended with the signing of the Galactic Resistance Charter, formally uniting all rebel species under a common command structure. Humanity would provide tactical expertise and coordination. Other species would contribute their unique strengths and local knowledge. Together, they would fight until every world was free from Caltharian rule. Fleet Commander Zexai received his final orders from the High Command. The human war was to be ended immediately, regardless of cost. If necessary, he was authorized to use planet-killer weapons to destroy Earth completely. The Empire could not afford to let this rebellion continue spreading across the galaxy. The example of successful human resistance had to be eliminated before other species became too bold to control. 2 years into the Galactic War, the conflict had spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Human-trained resistance fighters operated on 43 different worlds, teaching other species the guerrilla tactics that had proven so effective against Caltharian forces. Captain Amy Foster commanded joint strike teams that included warriors from 7 different species, each bringing their own unique abilities to the fight. The Zalani were natural infiltrators who could move through Caltharian installations undetected. The Korath were master engineers who could turn any building into a fortress. The Vegan had developed biological weapons that specifically targeted Caltharian physiology. Together, they formed an alliance that the Empire had never faced before and had no doctrine to counter. Admiral Jake Morrison's fleet had grown from 37 human ships to over 200 vessels of mixed origin, captured Caltharian warships, fought alongside retrofitted human freighters and alien resistance craft. The fleet looked like a collection of spare parts held together by determination. but it had proven devastatingly effective against Imperial forces. The success of human resistance tactics inspired other species to develop their own variations. The rock-dwelling granite developed underground networks that honeycombed entire planets. The aquatic delphine turned their ocean worlds into submarine battlefields where Caltharian forces could not operate effectively. Each species found ways to use their natural advantages against the aliens' commander. Ben Parker analyzed intelligence reports from across the galaxy and realized that the Caltharian Empire was facing its worst crisis in over 1,000 years. Rebellions were active on 60% of their conquered worlds. Supply lines were constantly under attack. Military units were spread so thin that they could barely maintain control of their most important installations. The key discovery came when Dr. Helen Ross studied captured Caltharian psychological profiles and found their greatest weakness. The Empire ruled through the appearance of invincibility. Every conquest had to be quick and decisive to maintain their reputation, but the humans had shattered that image by proving that successful long-term resistance was possible. Fleet commanders Xi had been replaced twice during the war as the Caltharian High Command searched for a general who could defeat the human-led rebellion. The current commander, War Marshal Corthax, was known for his ruthless efficiency and complete lack of mercy. His orders were simple: end the rebellion by any means necessary or face execution for failure. The tide of war began to turn when Lieutenant Laura Thompson led a coordinated assault on 17 Caltharian communication hubs simultaneously. Operation required precise timing across multiple star systems and perfect coordination between dozens of different resistance cells. When the attack succeeded, they cut the Empire's military communications network in half. The loss of communication capability had immediate and devastating effects on Caltharian military operations. Local commanders could no longer coordinate with each other or receive guidance from their superiors. Some units retreated to defensive positions while others launched desperate attacks. The rigid Imperial command structure collapsed into chaos and confusion. Major Steve Collins expanded the Mars defense model to 12 other human colonies, creating a network of fortress worlds that the Caltharians could not break through conventional assault. Each fortress was designed to withstand siege for years while serving as a base for guerrilla operations against Imperial supply lines. The defensive network turned the entire outer solar system into a military nightmare for the invaders. Breakthrough came when Captain Tony Garcia captured intact plans for the Empire's ultimate weapon, a planet-killer device called the World Ender. The weapon used focused gravity waves to tear apart planetary cores, destroying entire worlds in minutes. Intelligence indicated that the Caltharians were preparing to use the device against Earth if conventional forces could not end the rebellion. Dr. Paul Bennett worked frantically with scientists from allied species to develop countermeasures against the World Ender. The research revealed that the weapon required enormous amounts of energy and had to be deployed from specific orbital positions. More importantly, the device was vulnerable to electromagnetic interference during its charging sequence. The discovery of the World Ender threat led to the largest military operation in galactic history. President Mary Johnson authorized Operation Phoenix, a coordinated attack by every resistance cell, every rebel fleet, and every allied species against Caltharian installations throughout the galaxy. The goal was not just to save Earth but to cripple the Empire so badly that it could never recover. Commander Rachel Moore coordinated communication between resistance forces on 87 different worlds as Operation Phoenix began. Each group had specific targets designed to maximize damage to Imperial infrastructure while minimizing civilian casualties. The attacks would begin simultaneously across the entire galaxy, overwhelming the Empire's ability to respond effectively. Rebellion had spread to encompass their entire star system and was now threatening Caltharian control of the surrounding sectors. Industrial worlds that had been forced to manufacture Imperial weapons were now producing arms for the Resistance. The Empire's own infrastructure was being turned against them by the very species they had enslaved. Captain Amy Foster led the assault on the Caltharian Sector Command Center while other teams attacked military installations across the galaxy. Her strike force included elite warriors from 12 different species, each chosen for their specific skills and their burning hatred of Imperial rule. They moved like shadows through the heavily defended facility, eliminating guards and destroying critical systems. The success of the Sector Command assault cut off communication between War Marshal Corthax and half of his remaining forces. Imperial units throughout the sector found themselves isolated and surrounded by hostile populations that had been waiting years for a chance to strike back. Many Caltharian garrisons simply disappeared overnight as entire planets rose in revolt. Admiral Morrison coordinated the space battles from his flagship, while resistance forces attacked ground installations. The combined rebel fleet had grown to over 800 ships of various designs and capabilities. They fought with the desperation of species fighting for their freedom and the tactical brilliance learned from 2 years of guerrilla warfare. The Caltharian response to Operation Phoenix was swift but ineffective. Their remaining forces were scattered across too many worlds to mount coordinated counterattacks. Local commanders made increasingly desperate decisions as they lost contact with their superiors and found themselves surrounded by hostile populations. Dr. Helen Ross made a final crucial discovery while analyzing captured Imperial communications. The Caltharian High Command was preparing to abandon the outer territories and retreat to their core worlds. The empire that had once controlled half the galaxy was collapsing under the weight of simultaneous rebellions inspired by human resistance. The battle for the Caltharian shipyards at Vega became the turning point of the entire war. Commander Ben Parker led a joint force of human and alien ships against the heavily defended installation that produced most of the Empire's military vessels. The battle lasted for 3 days and ended with the complete destruction of the Imperial fleet construction capability. Lieutenant Karen White, now promoted to colonel after surviving dozens of suicide missions, led the final assault on the World Ender installation. Her team fought through layers of defense to reach the weapon control center just as the device was preparing to fire on Earth. With seconds to spare, Karen activated the electromagnetic pulse that Dr. Bennett had designed, overloading the weapons systems and causing a massive explosion that destroyed the entire installation. The explosion of the World Ender sent shockwaves throughout the Caltharian Empire. Their ultimate weapon had been destroyed by the very species they had dismissed as primitive. Morale collapsed among Imperial forces as word spread that even their most powerful weapons could not stop the human-led rebellion. War Marshal Korthax faced the choice that no Caltharian commander had ever confronted: admit defeat to an inferior species or watch his entire civilization collapse. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for over a millennium was crumbling, and the humans who had been asked to surrender 2 years earlier were now dictating terms to their former conquerors. War Marshal Korthax stood in the ruins of his command center and faced the impossible reality that the Caltharian Empire was dying. Half of their conquered worlds were in open revolt. Their military was scattered and demoralized. The weapon that was supposed to end the rebellion had been destroyed by the same primitive humans who were asked to surrender 3 years ago. The final message from the Caltharian High Command was brief and desperate. Korthax was ordered to destroy Earth using any means necessary, even if it required sacrificing his entire remaining fleet. The Empire could not survive if other species believed that successful rebellion was possible. The human example had to be eliminated regardless of cost. Captain Lisa Walker received an unexpected communication from a Caltharian officer requesting immediate diplomatic contact. Commander Velthak claimed to represent a faction within the Imperial military that wanted to negotiate an end to the war. The message was almost certainly a trap, but Lisa convinced President Jansov to authorize one final meeting. The diplomatic session took place aboard the neutral research station Europa, deep in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Lisa arrived with a small security detail, expecting treachery but hoping for peace. Instead, she found a broken Caltharian officer who could barely maintain his composure as he described the collapse of everything his people had built. Velthak explained that the Caltharian Empire had ruled through fear for over 1,000 years. Every species they encountered had surrendered after seeing demonstrations of imperial power. The concept of prolonged resistance was so foreign to their psychology that they had no doctrine for dealing with it. The humans had done something impossible by galactic standards. The psychological impact of human resistance had spread throughout the Empire like a virus. Conquered species that had been obedient for centuries were suddenly asking questions about Caltharian superiority. Military units were reporting declining morale and increasing desertion rates. The entire Imperial system was collapsing because one primitive species had refused to surrender. Lisa listened to Velthak's explanation with growing understanding. The Caltharians were not evil conquerors driven by malice. They were a species, trapped by their own psychology and unable to comprehend alternatives to their rigid hierarchy. The war had been as devastating to them mentally as it had been to humans physically. General Chris Taylor coordinated the final phase of Operation Phoenix from the underground command center beneath Geneva. Resistance forces across the galaxy were reporting overwhelming success against Imperial installations. The Caltharians were retreating on all fronts, abandoning outer territories to consolidate their remaining forces around their core worlds. Admiral Jake Morrison prepared for what intelligence suggested would be Corthax's final desperate gambit. Surveillance indicated that the remaining Caltharian fleet was massing for a suicide attack against Earth. The aliens had apparently decided that if they could not win the war, they would at least eliminate the species that had started the rebellion. The battle began when Corthax's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. 200 Caltharian warships moved toward Earth in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready for planetary bombardment. It was the largest single military force the Empire had deployed during the entire war, but they were not facing the same unprepared humans who had been surprised 3 years earlier. Earth's defenses now included captured Caltharian technology, weapons supplied by allied species, and tactical innovations developed through years of desperate warfare. More importantly, they were supported by ships from 17 different rebel species who had come to defend the world that had inspired their own freedom. The combined rebel fleet that met Corthax numbered over 1,000 vessels of every conceivable design. Human destroyers fought alongside Zalani stealth ships and Korath heavy cruisers. The Vegan had contributed biological weapon platforms, while the Jelani provided electronic warfare specialists. It was the most diverse military force in galactic history. Captain Amy Foster led the opening assault with a mixed squadron of human and alien fighters. Her pilots had learned to fight as a coordinated unit, despite coming from completely different species with different physiologies and tactical traditions. They moved through the Caltharian formation like surgical instruments, targeting specific systems to disable rather than destroy. The space battle raged for 6 hours, while ground-based weapons platforms added their firepower to the defense. But the decisive moment came when Colonel Danny Martinez, now commanding the orbital defense grid, activated the electromagnetic pulse network that Dr. Bennett had designed. The pulse overloaded Caltharian weapon systems across their entire fleet. Corthax found himself commanding ships that could not fight back effectively against an enemy that had learned to exploit every weakness in Imperial technology. His perfectly disciplined formation dissolved into chaos as disabled vessels drifted helplessly while rebel fighters swarmed around them like angry insects. The final confrontation came when Lisa Walker broadcast a message directly to the Calth fleet. She offered them the same choice their species had given to humanity 3 years earlier: surrender immediately or face destruction. But unlike the original Imperial ultimatum, Lisa's offer included terms that allowed the Caltharians to retain their dignity and their lives. The silence that followed Lisa's broadcast lasted for 27 minutes. During that time, the fate of 2 civilizations hung in the balance. Finally, Corthax himself responded with words that no Caltharian military commander had ever spoken: "We surrender unconditionally to the human-led alliance." The formal surrender ceremony took place aboard the same space station where Lisa had first rejected the Caltharian demands for human submission. The symbolism was intentional and powerful. The species that had been expected to kneel was now accepting the surrender of their former conquerors. President Johnson stood before representatives of 43 different species and announced the formation of the Galactic Freedom Alliance. The new organization would be based on cooperation rather than conquest, with each member species contributing their unique strengths to the common good. Earth would serve as the diplomatic center, but every world would govern itself according to its own traditions. Dr. Helen Ross addressed the assembly with her final research findings about the psychological differences that had made human resistance possible. She explained that humanity's refusal to surrender had not been based on superior technology or military genius, but on a fundamental aspect of human nature that could not accept slavery. The treaty negotiations lasted for months, as representatives worked to establish a new galactic order. The Caltharians would retain their core worlds, but would release all conquered territories and pay reparations to the species they had enslaved. More importantly, they would undergo psychological rehabilitation to help them adapt to a universe where cooperation was valued over domination. Commander Veltak, now representing the reformed Caltharian government, signed the final treaty documents with hands that trembled from emotion. His people had ruled the galaxy through fear for a millennium, but the humans had taught them that there were alternatives to endless conquest. The Empire was dead, but perhaps something better could be built from its ashes. Admiral Morrison reflected on the transformation that had occurred since the first Caltherian ships appeared at the edge of the solar system. Humanity had been asked to surrender and had responded with defiance that ignited a galaxy-wide revolution. The fire of freedom that began on Earth had spread to every corner of known space. The final scene of the war took place in a small classroom on New Geneva, rebuilt from the ashes of the original colony. Human children sat alongside young Zalani Korath and even Caltherian students as they learned about the history that had shaped their new world. The teacher, a former resistance fighter named Karen White, explained how sometimes the greatest victories came not from superior strength but from refusing to give up hope. The lesson ended with the words that had become the motto of the Galactic Freedom Alliance. When they asked for surrender, we gave them fire. When they demanded submission, we gave them freedom. When they expected us to kneel, we taught the galaxy to stand. The children repeated the words in dozens of different languages, their voices carrying the promise that the fire of liberty would never be extinguished again.